when you're what we call blended with a part, meaning we're merged with the part, we are feeling its feelings and sensations, we tend to feel or sense things more extremely. It might be a tension, it might be a fluttering of anxiety, it might be a bracing, right? So the person who comes in and says, I hate that part, right? I hate that part that binges. The I there is another part, that one that feels so intensely. And so starting what we do is we encourage people to get curious about how different parts of them show up in or around their body. And we say around their body because sometimes people experience things in their head, they experience them as a little bit outside of themselves, but basically helping them get a sense of parts show up in our bodies in terms of different sensations and feelings. And so starting to help people get curious about those.
We are so excited to have Dr. Jeanne Catanzaro with us. She is a clinical psychologist who has specialized in treating eating disorders and trauma for over 25 years. She trained in psychodynamics, psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, and EMDR before discovering the internal family systems. And you'll hear us talk a lot about that and call it IFS. It's the IFS model. She's also the author of the brand new book called Unburdened Eating, healing your relationship with food and your body using an internal family systems approach. Welcome, Jeanne. We're so delighted to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here too. I'm looking forward to it.
Jeanne, I'm going to start with the obvious, which is how did you come to title the book Unburdened Eating? It's such a wonderful phrase. I'm wondering how you came to that.
It was a process of really considering what did I want to communicate most about the IFS approach, internal family systems approach to healing. And it's about lifting the constraints to our core wisdom. And in IFS, we refer to that as unburdening. So it's getting to know the different extreme beliefs and feelings that parts of us have taken on that really make it exceedingly difficult for us to access this core wisdom. And so really it's, best lays out a process by which you can help parts who've taken on these extreme beliefs, very limiting ways of being in relationship with food and the body so that you can much more of the time make decisions that stem from that innate knowing.
So you use the magic word parts.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners what you mean by that. I mean, it's core to what we call IFS or internal family systems. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, when you think about it, the word saying there's a part of me who wants this, a part of me that wants that is pretty organic. Right? It feels pretty natural to most of us. And in the IFS model, parts are seen having the fact that we all have many parts is seen as a natural state of affairs. It's not pathological. The fact is that we have a number of different parts, each of which assist in our functioning, that we come into the world with these parts and that they, in ideal circumstances, they emerge at developmentally appropriate times to assist in our functioning and also just participate in life. But invariably, inevitably, each of us experiences traumatic or painful circumstances. And when that happens, these parts of us tend to become extreme. They take on what we call burdens. We just referred to them burdens of shame, fear, inadequacy. And then other parts of us are forced into roles designed to keep us away from the parts who hold the difficult or painful feelings and to prevent us from being hurt again. So just to state that naturally speaking, there are lots of parts of us we don't even think about because they're not burdened. Like the part of you who likes karaoke, for example, or likes to sing, or the part who likes to go in the water, right? Who really craves that. You don't usually think too hard or too much about that part because it's just delightful and playful or the part that's good at math, things like that. So The parts of ourselves that aren't burdened, we tend not to focus on or pay too much attention to, but it's the ones that get hurt or the ones that get extreme that we tend to start focusing on. And so, for a lot of folks who are tuning into this podcast, the parts who get them to eat past fullness, for example, or a part that criticizes them. And so when parts take on these burdens or trying to protect us, take on these protective roles, they become extreme and they tend to become very unifocused in what they do or what they feel. So, in addition to the parts, we all have a core wisdom, what IFS calls the self. And that's sort of an energy or a state of being where characterized by different qualities. In the IFS model, they all begin with C's. They don't need to. You can have a sort of, when you're connected to your core wisdom, there's a sense of being clear and compassionate and curious, creative. It's like a state of being in flow. You might experience that as openness, but generally speaking, it's when you're in your best kind of, this a state of flow and kind of openness. And so, when parts are not burdened, they kind of coexist with some support from the self. Sort of the self acts like a good parent that kind of steps in to help the parts interact harmoniously. Because invariably, there are just times when there's a basic conflict. Even if there isn't any actual conflict, one part of you wants to go for a swim, the other part thinks it would be better to stay home and cook dinner, for example. You might be able to relate to that, Nina, right? So,
Yeah.
but when parts get burdened and they really feel they adopt protective strategies that make them feel like I better do this or else, that's when they get very active and they basically obscure, make it very difficult for us to access that core wisdom about what we and our parts need. So,
Can we talk a little more about those burdens? Because I love how it's like the way you describe it. It's almost like this part that is trying to cope, right? That creates this extreme behavior. But in your book, you talk about personal burdens and legacy burdens and cultural burdens. And I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us.
sure, no, that'd be great. Because there are different ways that parts of us get hurt. There are different ways that burdens come into our systems. So I think what I'll just do is talk about it with respect to food and the body, right? Because that's what we're here to talk about. Right. So, we don't, and this is really a good illustration of the concept of parts and how, we come into the world with, and I just want to state one of the things about self is that the self is always there. It can't be damaged by trauma. It can't be damaged by years of dieting. It is within each of us. It doesn't need to be cultivated. This is what IFS believes, what I believe, that it is something that is accessible if we can heal the parts that come to take on these extreme beliefs and feelings from any number of experiences or messages. And so when we come into the world, we don't come into the world, as Sonia Renee Taylor says so well. Children don't come into this world in a negative partnership with their bodies. And she says, I've never seen a toddler limit the size of their thighs or the squishiness of their bellies. Those are parts of children that learn to start hating or disliking their bodies, but it's not how we start out. And so, but as soon as we come into the world, we are each of us bombarded with messages about our bodies, about ourselves and our bodies, how we should look, how we should move, what and how much we should eat. And we get these messages from a variety of sources. So in IFS, what we talk about is that there are various sources or burdens that that can attach to our parts. There are three different major groups. One is personal burdens, so experiencing things, taking on burdens through direct experience. And an example of that would be going to school and getting bullied.
Hmm.
Family or burdens that come from your family or ethnic groups. So growing up in a family that's has a lot of extreme ideas about food and the body. And so very from the get-go being told you shouldn't be eating that much or you should be eating everything on your plate. I don't care if you're hungry or not. So, children absorb these from their families and also watching their parents and how their parents treat their bodies. A mom who's standing in front of the mirror saying, I hate my body. I can't find anything to wear, that kind of thing. A dad who cannot go on a vacation without making sure that there's a fully equipped gym at the hotel, various messages that you get from your family members. And then the next level is the cultural legacy burdens, which we're just immersed in, right? Again, from the time we arrive here. So we're getting messages about willpower and which bodies are more valuable than others. And, of course, these are not neat and tidy categories. There's a lot of overlap. And again, we're getting these messages from the get go, especially as we head off to school. And we're getting messages not only from our family and our caretakers and doctors, but now teachers and other kids. And then we're seeing who's the most desirable, right? Who's the most popular, which bodies are given the most support and the most resources, and then the ones that are more vulnerable to harm, bullying, things like that. And so, as a result of all of those messages, all of those experiences, parts of us, and in addition, not only to the messages and experiences related to food and the body, but also as a result of other painful and traumatic experiences, the most vulnerable parts of our system, which IFS refers to as exiles, which I'll tell you why in a minute. The most vulnerable parts of our systems get hurt. They get hurt. They're made to feel shame, fear, terror, inadequacy, right? We call them exiles because the pain and the all of those feelings that the exiles hold are so intense, so painful, so overwhelming. They can feel so overwhelming that other parts of us, what IFS calls for protectors, step in to try to basically shove those parts out of our awareness so we don't have to feel them.
Before we get to our parts, because there's a lot of them, right? I want to unpack this just a little
Sure.
further if we can, Jean, right? So you say so clearly in the book, so beautifully, burdens are the feelings and beliefs that attach to parts of you and cause extreme behaviors.
Right.
Right? And this is an important concept because, the folks that are listening, the folks that we all work with, that we have the privilege of working with, they just so often say, it's like I'm watching myself do this. I know what I know, and then I do what I do, and it doesn't seem to be any connection between what I know and what I do, right? It's that sort of little synapse in the middle, right? And I think that there's something to be understood about where that separation occurs, right?
Mhm.
And you're talking about lots of different factors, including diet culture, including trauma, including just the messages that we get throughout our lives. We're not throwing anybody under a bus here. It's just the messages that we get,
Right.
and we internalize them the way we do.
That's right.
And I think what's so fascinating and useful about this way of thinking about these things is that when it's sort of that there are parts involved, right? It isn't this overwhelming mess. There's an opportunity to understand that each part of us has a function and a reason. But the one thing I want to ask you, because a lot of my clients have asked me this, do parts mean we have different personalities? They're thinking like, do I have like a multiple personality, issue? Can you
Right.
distinguish that for folks?
Yes. No, I appreciate the question. I mean, getting back to this idea of parts being a natural, non-pathological way of being, that it's just natural to be multiple, and each of the parts has assist in some way in our functioning or an enjoyment of life, and they all have positive intentions naturally.
Before you go on, I want to really highlight that. They all have positive intentions, right? All the parts of us are trying to help us cope this very complex world. And I just want to like yellow highlighter that because people can easily go, ugh, how do I get rid of that part?
Right, because some parts can get extreme. Again, when parts of us get hurt, right? When they take on burdens of shame, inadequacy, fear, terror, and we're young, right? That feels like an emergency, feels like a problem. We need to do something about it so other parts can step in, protective parts, and do things that can seem extreme, right? The part that hates us or is ruthless with criticism is certainly a part, that other parts can point to and say, "Oh my god, I wanna get rid of that part. That part, it's awful."
So let's get specific about that. Let's use that as an example. Right? So let's use the example because we can geek out on all the like the legacy burdens and personal burdens and exiles and all of the sort of languaging around internal family systems. But I think what would be really helpful is if we got specific and like a client comes and says, I've been binging and oh my gosh, I am the worst, right? Right away we have two parts. So let's talk about that and unpack what's happening there.
Okay. I'm gonna suggest to your listeners that and to you also, that one of the easiest ways to grasp IFS is to imagine these parts as inner people, right? They are subpersonalities. And each of these subpersonalities has a range of thoughts and feelings, even if their focus seems to be on one thing. And if you can think about these as inner people, it becomes a lot easier to grasp.
Like the cartoon. Remember the movie? What was it? Within
Inside
or
Out,
Inside Out,
Inside
right?
right.
out.
Inside
Yep.
Out,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So somebody comes in and they say, "I'm the worst. I've been binging."
I've been
Right,
binging. I'm the worst.
right. I'm the worst. So right there, who's the I there? Right?
Right.
Who's the I there? And usually people come in and they say, I want to stop the binging. I want to
Hmm.
get rid of the binging. And as Jenny just said, there are times when people can say, I know it's not good for me. I
Hmm.
know it's not good for me. I know I need to stop that. I know it makes me miserable. And so one of the things that's wonderful about IFS is it starts to, and Jenny, you said this before, it can seem like quite a mess, right? Because there are all these competing impulses and feelings and whatnot. And what IFS, by positing that we each have these different parts, that they all have positive intentions, even if it doesn't seem so, it allows us to start to get curious about what parts are involved and why. So to help us get a little bit more room internally.
I'll interrupt you for one
Yeah.
second. In the case of any behavior that
Hmm.
we don't want to be doing, whether it's, we could make a list, right? The question that most of us ask first is why? Why do I do this? There has to be a reason. There's probably 10 reasons, but there has to be
Right.
a reason, right? And I think one of the most useful things about internal systems is when you identify this, particular part called the protector, right?
Hmm.
I mean, when you think about any behavior that you do repeatedly, that you sort of have learned to do, you almost
Hmm.
can't help but do, even though you wish you weren't doing it, right? You
Hmm.
can pretty much assume there's a pretty good reason it's there. And mostly it's because in some ways it's been working. And what usually brings someone into one of our offices that it's not working anymore. And what is it not working at in some ways? To protect us. There's some way in which this behavior may protect us from, you know, fill in the blank. I mean, is that your experience as well?
Yeah. Well, I think people come into our offices with some curiosity, but also parts who just want to get rid of the parts that are upsetting, right? So this idea of why am I doing this and having a part that thinks about the reasons, let's say for the binging, let's stick to the binging.
Hmm. Hmm.
Somebody comes in and says, I hate this. And I know it's not good for me, but I keep doing it. So there are parts of them there's a part that's binging. Then there are parts who have a lot of negative feeling towards the part that's binging. They feel out of control as a result of it. Whatever negative circumstances, maybe there's a part that has a lot of beliefs about health, right? Has been made to carry a lot of, as a lot of us are in this culture, about health. That part is also frantic to try to get the binging part to stop. There isn't a ton of natural curiosity, right? There may be some part that says, I am a little, or some space for curiosity. But a lot of times there's just a real wish to get rid of the part. So starting out with, if we can either alone or with the help of a therapist, get curious, first to notice the parts that really want it to stop and want to get it to stop. Because one of the things that's true is that if we can get into a genuinely curious stance towards a protector, we can learn a little bit more about the ways it has protected us and the ways it still does protect us,
Mm.
right? Because it's not all or nothing.
You're saying something so critical, Jean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, to understand that it's been protective. And you can imagine when someone has that level of insight to figure that out,
Mhm,
there's also a slowness to want to give up a protector when it's been protective, right? Like,
mhm.
what's going to protect me now if I give this up? So that's where so much of the work gets done. Yeah,
I just want to name that the first thing is that because each of our protectors believes that it has the answer for how to keep us safe in whatever way that is, emotionally, physically, whatnot, it will do what it does until it starts to trust that there is a core self, that within us is this core self that can actually handle things. So that takes time. It's a process of understanding how did that part come to adopt that protective strategy? What were the circumstances? And in our culture, it's not just what happened in the past that that part took on that extreme way of being. It's also what are the circumstances that keep that part feeling like it needs to do that
I
now?
think there's a way to sort of the image that comes to mind, just to clarify that even more, is if our job has been to stand at the door and hold the door because somebody's gonna break in, and then somebody says, "Stop holding the door." You're like, "I'm not gonna stop holding the door, somebody's trying to break in, and
Exactly.
I'm not gonna let go of that door until I know either that nobody's breaking in or somebody else is holding the door for me."
That's right.
good example.
And to
That's right.
honor that part going, "No, I'm holding the door.
That's
That is
right.
my job, and I have a very important job,"
That's
right?
right.
And to really
Right.
honor those protectors.
That's right. And so if we go back to the binging part, people our clients come in, they're not usually complaining about their restricting parts, are they?
No.
Right? They don't come and say, "I really
Nope.
want that part to stop doing that."
Yeah.
Right? They come in because in our culture, certain parts, certain protectors are lauded. They're upheld as, better. And so the restricting parts aren't the ones that they come in complaining about. They just want the binging to stop. But meanwhile, this is another important piece. Parts of us each are doing what they need to do to keep us safe. But as one part goes to one extreme, it will polarize. And another part will go to the opposite extreme to balance it out. So the binging part, which is often pathologized and seen as, what's wrong with that part? It's so out of control. When you can get curious about what that part is doing, it's often acting in direct, eh, you know, counteracting a part that's restricting.
Sure.
Mhm. That thinks it's being so awesome. "See, I've been so in control, and I've
Right.
been eating my only teeny tiny allotment of food, and look how good I am."
And it's important to name that that is so cultural, right?
So
That
cultural.
that to be restrictive means you are disciplined, you are
Hmm.
smarter, by the way, you're probably more attractive, oh, by the way, and
Right.
you're younger. Just that's what we assign to it.
Ouch and more ouch.
I mean, how many people come in and say, when they say, "Well, I eat enough across the day," and then you actually get curious with them because they come in complaining about eating at night. Right? I can't stop eating at night. I'm binging in front of the TV. And then as you get curious, you find out that they considered coffee with milk and whatever to be the meal up until late in the day. So there's a deficit that builds, not just a physical deficit, but the emotional deficit of being that restrictive all day. But all the focus tends goes on is directed towards stopping the binging part. And what that does, of course, is activates the binging part more. And until we really address that, that part is not going to ease up on what it does until we address the part that's it's polarized with as well.
Mhm.
That we pay attention to what's driving the binging, which in part is the one that's restricting all day.
I love that. I'm gonna slow you down there because
Sure.
those 2 parts of one part that's saying, "Oh gosh, I'm a this is the problem because I'm binging. But who there's always, like in any relationship,
Always,
there's it
always,
takes
right.
two to tango. So what's the other part? The other part is the restrictive part. And we have to actually engage both parts to be able to work towards an unburdening.
That's right.
So, Nina, you just used an interesting word, right? We have to engage the parts, right?
Mhm.
Mm.
So, Jean, I have to say, I think this book is extraordinary. It's called Unburdened Eating, if you just joined us. I think it's extraordinary because it really does explain things, both for layman and professional alike, in ways that is just so accessible. But the thing that so intrigues me is that, in the clinical setting,
Mhm.
you know, it's one thing to sort of identify these parts, have somebody understand conceptually, how this works. But there's an interaction with the parts in the clinical setting. Can you
Right.
speak to that a bit?
You mean in the clinical setting or once the clients leave and are engaging themselves?
Either, either. I mean, the fact that you're
Right.
literally, interacting with the parts.
You're saying, so what does this part say? Where, like, your statement, I love this, like, location is everywhere, is
Right.
everything. Location is everything, that title for that chapter. Like, how do you start that engagement with a part?
So I start to consider when you're going back to the difference between being when you are led by yourself, you have more of a spacious, open, curious, compassionate kind of energy, right? That's how it feels. You're in a state of flow. When you're what we call blended with a part, meaning we're merged with the part, we are feeling its feelings and sensations. We tend to feel or sense things more extremely. It might be a tension. It might be a fluttering of anxiety. It might be a bracing, right? So the person who comes in and says, I hate that part, right? I hate that part that binges. The I there is another part,
Mhm.
Mhm.
that one that feels so intensely. And so starting what we do is we encourage people to get curious about how different parts of them show up in or around their body. And we say around their body because sometimes people experience things in their head, they experience them as a little bit outside of themselves, but basically helping them get a sense of parts show up in our bodies in terms of different sensations and feelings. And so starting to help people get curious about those. And usually it's really helpful to meet with an IFS therapist to learn how to do this because when somebody's present, they can say, "Do you notice the part that just said, 'I hate the one who binges'? Can we pay a little bit of attention? Can we get curious about the part who's feeling that way? Where do you notice that part?" And the people will invariably say things like, I feel it right here. I feel it. It's in my head, and it feels very pinched. It feels very angry, or it feels really helpless. Right? It feels like there's nothing I can do about the binging, whatever it is. So starting with the place of what we call a U-turn, which is going inside and just helping the person focus on where that intense feeling sensation comes in. It might be an image that somebody's getting. They might start to notice that they feel really foggy and it's hard to think clearly when they're talking about a particular subject and just helping them take a moment, go inside. Can you notice where that part shows up? And how do you feel towards that part? Which is really a way of detecting how much separation do they have, how much access to their self energy. Again, self energy being curiosity, compassion, right? Confidence, creativity, those 8 C's, those qualities, but just to be able to get a little separation.
It's so critical here. We've talked about the protector parts, right? And I think intuitively those make so much sense.
Mhm.
Right.
Can you distinguish for us in a simple way what is meant by the manager parts? Because those are ever present.
Right. Ever
Right.
present. Yes. So
Our culture constantly actually encourage us. encourages us to be those managers of our
Mhm.
bodies, of our environment, of everything.
We're a
Mm.
manager-centric culture,
Mm.
for
Mhm.
sure. And firefighter-centric. We also have tons of firefighters, we just don't like them as well, right? So again, remembering that when we're young and vulnerable, which is when we don't have access to our core wisdom in the same way that we do when we're older and we're physically more mature, we have more resources. But when we're young and vulnerable and the most vulnerable parts of us get hurt, those are the parts that are known as exiles. And they're the ones that carry all the shame, terror, worthlessness, things like that. And it feels like an emergency for those parts to be there and with all their feelings. And so other parts of us step in to try to keep those parts out of our awareness. And so in the protector realm, there are two types of protectors. Managers are one type, and the managers are the parts that work proactively, steadily to keep the exiles out of our awareness and
Mm.
to do whatever they can to make sure we don't get hurt again.
Mhm.
And they can adopt any number of strategies, but things like parts that work really hard. There are perfectionist parts, work really hard to make sure we look good so we don't get criticized again, right? Parts who are really productive, overworking, so we can keep getting accolades to keep us to compensate for the shame or the sense of inadequacy. So managers are the parts of us that are try to get us to look good,
Yeah.
right? And again, they're socially sanctioned. We like our managers. They're really supported by the culture, right? But they work proactively.
And these would be examples like when we use phrases like people pleasers,
Totally.
Mhm.
caretakers, right?
Absolutely.
Perfectionists,
All of those. Mhm.
Okay. And you mentioned firefighters. So
Right.
can you explain to the folks what that's about?
I also wanna say our critics tend to be managers also, right? Kind of on a regular basis trying to get us to do whatever it is that we can do to avoid being shamed or, any being rejected, anything like that. But invariably, so you're steadily, plugging along, doing your best, the managers are, to get you to not experience anything that's gonna activate the exiles. Right? So they're gonna do whatever they can to make sure you don't get shamed or blamed or rejected and whatnot. But invariably, at some point, the exile's pain is gonna break through to awareness, right? You have low energy one day and your managers aren't as adept, for example, or just because life has its way of, you know, triggering. And so when that happens and the exile's feelings break through to your awareness, the second type of protector needs to step in right away to try to do whatever they can to extinguish and get those feelings right back out of awareness, right? So, though we call them firefighters because unlike managers, the firefighters are reactive and they don't care about the consequences, right? They don't care about the social consequences of their actions
Right, let's get back into the practical. Okay, so you're coming home, you've been lauded for being in control and
all
self-control
day.
all day long, right?
Yeah,
And so you've been, like, on your restricted caloric intake, and then you get home. And then who's showing up? Let's just go into the whole binge profiles and name who's the firefighter and who's the manager.
great. So, for a lot of my clients, they're at work all day and nobody's taking a lunch break, right? Nobody's taking a lunch break or they're eating popcorn at their desk and, that's about it. And, talking about how they're not eating and whatnot. So there's a lot of restriction building up over the day. And with that, because as the managers keep the exiles suppressed, the exiles are all alone. So their deprivation is getting amplified. Their actual deprivation is getting amplified. And for a lot of my clients, it's on the way home that they're starting to note the managers are getting tired. The deprivation of their exiles has increased. And so there's increasing amounts of tension. And then they get home, and all of a sudden, they're presented with the task of eating dinner and facing a night where they're either dealing with families and kids or they're alone, whatever. More stress
Not to
usually.
mention that they're physically ravenous
Absolutely.
Right.
because they've actually thought to themselves, how can I possibly eat throughout the day? Knowing what I do at night, if I eat during the day too, oh my God, what's that going to mean? Right. So they're hungry in so many ways at that moment.
That's right, and parts are getting anxious on the way home about how are we gonna
Yeah.
handle this.
Yeah.
So they get home, many people, their managers will choose dinner, right? Their managers will make a choice. It's a dinner that isn't fully satisfying or it's not enough food. And then at some point, all the deprivation plus whatever's going on emotionally kind of just breaks into their awareness and they're feeling lonely and fed up and tired, whatever, a lot of pain. And then in that moment, what happens is a part then suddenly grabs something, right? Grabs something and says, fuck it, I'm eating, whatever it is. Or it may not be as extreme like that to begin with. It may be a more subtle, a different this firefighter comes in and says, "I'm eating something," and maybe it's not as much, but there's a battle that then ensues between the part that's saying, "I can't believe you fucked up. We were good all day." That manager gets more and more critical, which then increases the amount of shame and feeling out of control, which then brings the firefighter in because what it feels like the firefighter's just interested in getting the person out of pain. It
Hmm.
just wants to soothe or numb.
Let me just say that one more time. So important. The firefighter just wants to get us out of pain. You're uncomfortable. I have a solution for
That's
you.
right. The positive intention,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Just want you to feel better. I just don't want you to feel like this. Right. And that makes the critical part even more critical. Right. And then I can't believe you did this again. Here we are, more shame. And so the cycle continues. And like Jenny said, sets you up for the next day.
Yep.
But
And we usually see this division of labor where the managers, it's like they have different shifts. The managers are working during the day and the
Mm.
firefighters are working at night. Not always though. Right.
I
So
love that shift work concept. So our listeners are listening. They're like, "Great. I love this concept. IFS sounds really great." How besides going to an IFS clinician, how can I start to actually even incorporate some of these ideas in my everyday? What's the one first step that I can take to go, oh, I have parts, or wow, this is a firefighter? What do you suggest is an easy walk in?
There are a number of really great resources at this point. So there are a number of books that will give you books and workbooks that will give people the beginning sense of the basics of the IFS model.
there's a workbook I noticed there's a workbook that's available if folks go out to get your wonderful book, which is called Unburdened Eating. There's actually like an accompanying workbook, isn't there?
No, there isn't. That is an AI version that is not mine.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
I
Okay.
good to
know.
know. Good to know.
I didn't want it anyway.
A little fright did you get a little frightening to me, but I'm working on a workbook with my illustrator, Sasha Mardu, and excited about that, but that is not gonna come out with the speed at which the AI version made it onto
Okay.
Amazon, but
Wow.
yeah, it's amazing, right? And I did read the description of it, and I don't think it will align with my book. What I would suggest is No Bad Parts that Dick Schwartz wrote is a very good primer, and I do, of course, like my book. I think it lays things out pretty well for both the layperson and the clinician alike. I do think that's thank you, and
I'm holding up unburdened eating.
thank
Hmm.
you, but it's not meant to be a comprehensive, you know, layout of everything. So I'm gonna name a couple of other things. There's the on also easily available, there's a IFS trauma skills manual, which has a number of different exercises designed to help you start to get to know ways of focusing inside, learning more about your system, getting to know different parts of your system, and then starting to work with them. And so that's the trauma skills manual. There's a compassion for addictive processes manual written by C. Sykes and Dick Schwartz and Martha Sweezy, and that's really quite good too. Also laying out some exercises, some of which are really good for parts who focus on food in the body as well, because they really help you with some of these polarizations between the different protectors in a lovely way. So I would suggest getting some of those.
So for anyone who's listening and then they're in the car and they're very worried because they didn't hear anything you just said, we will we will
Mhm.
have a list of all of those resources that you just said, on our website, right, alongside this episode, because I think they're very important and very critical. And I do want to say, your book, I think, is the primer.
Oh,
For
thank you.
the folks that are really struggling with their concept of their own body, their own place in the world, their own however they see their relationship to food, how they eat. I think this is a brilliant primer. I think it really sort of sets the stage for a very different way of looking at this. That's not to say
Thank you.
that if there are those listening that, have been sort of working on this in various ways throughout their lives, that it was a waste because they were waiting for this. But I am saying that I think this builds on whatever they've been doing. And I think it's just a beautiful frame to really look at it differently and with much more compassion.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So much more compassion, which is always missing in my experience.
Yeah. And if I can say one last thing, what I do think, because I trained in other models of therapy, which I think are still like, I still believe in all these different ways of approaching.
Mm,
So none of it's a waste. I think one of the things that you mentioned before is this experience of, I know this, why am I still doing it? I think IFS is so helpful with, because when you consider that there are just different parts with different agendas, it makes you can say, oh, I get it. I can really know this. I can want something different. And then there's still this part of me that needs some help to trust that it doesn't need to do this anymore. So it's the teasing apart of the parts, holding them with this sense that they all want something good for us, and then giving them the support and the help they need to be able to consider that it can be okay to do something different.
beautiful, beautiful.
Jean, is there a way that if people wanna follow you or get to know more about your work, how can they be connected?
They can go to www.jeannecatanzaro.com. It's very simple. And then I have different workshops and retreats that I'll list there. One that's coming up, a couple coming up in March. There is an IFS trauma conference, Trauma Through a Diverse Lens, in 2 weeks, close to Chicago in St. Charles, and that'll be not just with me, but Dick Schwartz and a couple of other presenters. But then I have a retreat on unburdened eating in Costa Rica in March, and then another
Hmm.
one with a couple of colleagues, Marcella Cox and Teresa Chestnut, in Chester, Connecticut, also in March. So, but I think to be continued, there'll be other domestic opportunities and, yeah, workshops.
Teresa's coming to Connecticut? My God. We know Teresa. She's coming across the country.
She
Good for
is.
her.
Oh,
Okay.
also, I just wanted to mention that she has a wonderful conference in April called it's the Tri-State Eating Disorder Conference. It'll be the third one this coming April. It's fabulous.
Yes, and it's also available virtually, which is
Yeah,
great.
I'm sorry it
Yeah,
is virtual. That's right.
yeah, it is. Yeah, wonderful. Jean, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
Thank
precious time
you.
and for writing such a wonderful book and for being with us.
Thank you. Loved your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And for again, the book is Unburdened Eating. We highly recommend. It'll certainly start conversations not only with other people, but with all your parts.